Hi, I'm Buck Woody, and I'm here to talk to you today about some presentation skills you might need to learn. And there's a very important one to learn, and that is basically using citations, references, and fair use when we talk about our topics that we've been asked to speak at conferences and places like that. Listen, we all have to do research. None of us knows this stuff just all by ourselves. And so we have to figure out how does this work? Where does this go? And so on. And then we explain it to other people. That's how presenting works. And we've got to get that information from somewhere. And I'm sure we've all been to a presentation that was just amazing, or we've read a document that's incredible, or we've seen a picture and we're not quite artists like everyone else is. And so we need to figure out, how do we reference that work, or how do we use that work, or how do we point to that work without stealing it? Because if someone's gone to all that work to put it together, we can't just reuse it. That's their work and not ours. And quite frankly, if someone wants to see that person's work, they should go see that session. You should bring something new to it. Well, let's talk about how we do that. And we think about that a great deal when we start talking about finding our sources and our references and so on. There's a couple of things to think about as we do this. The first is there's two kinds of methods of this kind of research, and I'll pop over and show a website in just a moment. And in fact, that brings up an interesting point. One of the things I try to do is to always let people know where I've gotten my material, and I'll do that either right on the screen, which you'll see in just a moment, an example of that, or I'll put it down in the notes view of PowerPoint. If you're not using the notes view of PowerPoint, you should read how to do that along with how to do a presenter view. You'll really enjoy that. But put your notes there. When you print those out or when you make your handouts, whether those are electronic or they're on paper, make sure you include those notes so people know what your work is and what someone else's work is. Well, there's a couple of kinds of research that we can do. I'll pop over here to a website where we can see that kind of information put to us there. The first is called primary research, or the research that we do on our own. And then there's secondary research. And the difference here, I've got this link for this site and definitely want you to go check that out. But the difference is, primary research is research work you've done on your own. Let's say you're presenting something on database backups. Well, you could go out and find any number of really great presentations, and you could just grab their scripts and you could just redo it. But that's theft. That's not your own work. What you would do is do some research inside the documentation, inside the help files, and so on. You would try a few things, and then as things light up for you, that forms the basis of your presentation. You say, hey, look, when I tried this, here's what I ran across. Now, you may say to yourself, well, I probably won't be original. I won't have something new to say. But the fact that you're doing it makes it new. And there's someone that's in your situation, whether you're a beginner, you've been doing this a little while, or you're brand new to the whole topic, or you've been doing it for decades. You've got something to bring that people need to hear. It could just be your accent or your language or the way you present things that makes it unique to you. That's primary research. Secondary research is where you point off to what someone else has done. Now, there's a difference between pointing off to what someone else has done and reusing that. And there's a fine line for how we think about those things. Now, when we go do our original research, one of the things we're tempted to do is just pop open a web browser and begin searching, and the first few hits we get, we grab those and we take those as valid. Back in my day, which was a long, long time ago, we only had the library that we could use, the public libraries nearby, or school library, where I could go research things. And there was a research librarian who would help me find authoritative data. And over time, I learned a little mantra that I've actually taught my daughter and a lot of other folks. And in fact, I've got, you probably saw the link there just a second ago. Let me pop it back up. That link that I had to my course. I've created a course on data literacy. And if you go to this web course, and once again, this is in your notes, if you go to this website, you'll actually find an entire place where you can go find how to find authoritative data. But in general, authoritative data, whenever I research something, and as a data scientist, I have to do this because I'm making predictions about things, and so my base data needs to be very reliable. I ask these three questions. Who's telling me this? So you want to go after someone that's recognized in the field, or maybe the product developer. Maybe if you're using a product from a vendor, you want to go look up their documentation and make sure they're the ones that are saying it, that it's not just some random person that you've never heard of. You can't vet that person. The second question to ask yourself is, what are they telling me? And you're thinking, well, that's just right there on the page, isn't it? No, it's a little more than that. Sometimes when people say, well, I didn't say I took that book, what they're telling you there is they didn't say it, but they actually did take the book. I didn't say I took the book. Someone else said it. I didn't say I took the book. I didn't say it. I intimated it in some other way. You get the idea there. The idea is you need to look deeper into what are they really telling me. And then the third one is very interesting. Why are they telling me this? If you go to a used car salesperson and they tell you this is the best car in the whole world, never had a problem, so cheap, amazing car, you should buy it. You know who's telling you that is the salesperson. They're telling you that this car has zero problems, which is pretty suspect, I think. And the third thing is, why are they telling me this? Well, it's right there in their title. They're the salesperson. They want you to buy that vehicle. So right there, I would begin to color that information. Well, we've done our primary research and we begin to do our own work, and it's okay to point to people who say, hey, look, I looked at this other article where this person says this. Hasn't been my experience, but you may want to check it out. Here's a great reference. The next thing you need to learn to do is to do citations. And you can see an example of this on the bottom. In fact, these three things that I've gotten for citations are from this source that you see down on the bottom. Now, do you need to include that for every single line you're doing? Not necessarily. You could make a short URL and point to that in that way, or you could put it down at the bottom. Certainly, if you're writing anything, you want to make sure you cite your sources. And you might say to yourself, well, I don't really know how to cite my sources. How do I sort or cite a reference? Well, I'm glad you asked. Let's go take a look. I actually have a place for you to do that. If you go, there's a number. I have like probably 7 or 8 or maybe 10 of these things where you can go do citations. I like the one from Purdue University that I found because it tells you how to do things for all kinds of things. It's following something called the Chicago Style Manual, which is an older style manual here in the U.S. for writing things. So it's a lot of reporters and newspaper folks and things like that will use the Chicago style. There's a few others. In your country, it's probably different, and that's okay. The reason I kind of like the one here is I can actually put down the cite my source, and I can click cite, and it will actually run off and develop a site, and it'll ask me, did you get the person's information to do this? Is it accurate? And even tells you, it's your questions. Once again, who's telling me this? What are they telling me? And why are they telling me? When you click the button, it will make that nice citation for you. I use that a great deal when I do these things. Now, another place you might want to think about is graphics. Graphics is probably one of the toughest. Here where I work, I actually have a company I pay, and they will create graphics for me, and then they sell them to me, and they're now mine to work with. We're often tempted just to go to the web, type in an image of a car, grab the car, select, copy, paste, and down it goes. You really shouldn't be doing that. There's a few sources you can use for things like this. Highly recommend you look up something called Creative Commons. Read through the licensing that's there. Whenever you're dealing with graphics on the web, you're dealing worldwide. And so there may be a lot of laws and regulations that are involved in all these things. And you want to make sure you don't take something you're not supposed to take. And there's lots of places where you can pull things down. If you're using Microsoft's PowerPoint, we have a lot of insert graphics, and those graphics are there for you to use. You can look those up as well to see what the licensing is involved. Some search engines will allow you to only get certain licenses, fair use type licenses. And even there, you need to be careful. For instance, if I'm doing something for a pay. I'm getting paid to do something. That's a commercial license that I need to obtain. If I'm doing something for a user group and I'm not being paid to do it and it's volunteer, it could fall under a license of common use. So you want to make sure you kind of look that up. And we're going to go back into how you kind of find that in just a bit. And then finally, we think about quotes of people, and there's ways to cite quotes. There was a famous person called Yogi Berra here in the United States, a sports person, and he was known for malapropisms, meaning saying something incorrectly, but you get the point, you get the meaning. And theoretically, he is supposed to have said, I didn't really say all that stuff I said, because people would attribute things to him he didn't even say. For instance, he said one time, it's not over until it's over, which is kind of interesting to even think about that. But he wrote, as I mentioned, this thing, I didn't really say all that stuff I said. So even when you're quoting somebody, make sure you're quoting from a reliable resource. We see so many sources attributed to Einstein and other famous people that they never said. A very famous one is Bill Gates is supposed to have said, no one will ever need more than 640K of RAM when he was talking about the early days of computing. Well, it turns out he never said that. But these things just kind of take on a life of their own. Another famous one is in the movie, one of my favorite movies, Casablanca. Supposedly, Humphrey Bogart says, play it again, Sam, thinking about a tune that he and his girlfriend liked. Well, he never said that. And so on. Of course, we all know what happened with Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker, right? He didn't really say that either. Okay, so this is the idea around references, graphics, and quotes. Now let's go to the heart, really, of this entire session. This session here deals with something called plagiarism. And as you can see, I've even got it from the Bing search I did. I've copied the Powered by Oxford dictionaries in the Bing translator, so you know exactly where I got this from. And basically, it's the practice of taking someone else's work and passing it off as your own. You can't take someone else's PowerPoint deck, their outline, their flow, or anything else and redeliver it and call it your own, because it's not. You shouldn't even ask for permission to do that. Now, we all take in original research, synthesize it, and then move forward. Someone taught you to speak your language. You didn't invent the language that you're speaking, so clearly you are using the work of someone else. And that gets to be a fine line. At what point am I just quoting books online from SQL Server as opposed to doing my own work? Well, as a very interesting set of articles, once again, right down here in your notes view on this PowerPoint, which we'll make available to you, where you can check what the word fair use, and that's what you need to figure out. There have been a lot of money spilled from musicians who have stolen parts of songs and then passed it back off and used it in their own as if it was their own work, and they've gotten sued and they've lost on these kinds of things. And the laws can be very complicated, so you're best to err on the side of safety. Last reference I'll show you here just before we finish this little quick session. I've got an article for you here from Stanford Libraries, which talks about fair use and how you can use the different parts of this within your product. So you want to make sure you do your own work. Again, I highly recommend that you go to Creative Commons and look up the way that they look at things, because they do quite a bit of work in that area where they explain how you can use the various parts. In general, it's this. Don't ever ask a speaker, can I take your material and redeliver it? Just don't do that. It's not fair for you to ask, and it's not fair for them to give it to you. All my presentations, unless I state otherwise and they're owned by someone else, or the materials are owned by someone else, are fair use. I don't mind you using some of my graphics and things like that. I'll explicitly state when you're allowed to do that. And whenever you do that, you always reference it. I always credit folks, if I can, if I try very hard to do this at any rate, I'll say something like my good friend Bob Ward said, or Anna Hoffman once told me, to make sure that I cite that this is their thought, their work. This will keep not only you out of trouble when you use someone else's work, but it keeps you out of trouble if they've made a mistake. Let's assume Bob has said something wrong. Now, I've never known that to happen, and I'm being honest here. Bob is meticulous about the information that he goes through. But assume for a moment that he did make a mistake, and I say, oh, you can only have 13 of those file segments, or what it is, whatever it is. Well, if Bob's wrong, now I'm wrong. But if I say, well, Bob tells me that I can have 13 of those file segments, then when someone comes back and says we can have 14, I'll say, well, that's what Bob said. So you're able to protect yourself in that way too. Look, everyone's got something original to say. Take in the information, synthesize it, and make sure you follow these simple rules of citing people's works, using the correct graphics, making quotes, and not wholly or even partially reusing someone else's work. It will make you a better presenter, and the community will be richer for it. Thanks for listening.